So the paper that I'm presenting here is trying to work with Marietta, who is also here, and Paulo Ramizio. He's from civil engineering, but has been working with us in some topics related to water. So the idea of this paper began by a curiosity, if you want, that do people know the price they pay for water? And because sometimes it is advised in policy forums that the price of water should raise because of scarcity, and so people would refrain from consumption with a rise in prices. But our hypothesis is, do people really know how much they pay for water in Portugal? And then we related this to the electricity price, since water and electricity consumption by households tend to be correlated, highly correlated. And so, and the price of electricity is usually above the price of water. So is this a difference? Is it a difference in perception of prices, or is it a price difference that drives the different behavior? So this was the motivations to start this project, which is just the first leg of the project that we are intending to develop in the future. This should work. It's not working, that's fine. So the plan of my presentation, first I'll give a little bit of motivation for the paper, then some previous evidence from the literature, the methodology that we applied in this paper, and then some results, discussion, and conclusions to end. So starting with the motivation, so there seems to be some water energy nexus, not only in consumption, but also in the production. In Portugal, electricity production comes mostly from dams, so electric hydropower plants. And so there is this nexus in production, which actually this paper and the data was collected before, but Portugal was having a very serious drought in February, around February. And there was this big discussion that hydropower plants were draining too much water, too much for water's sake, enough for electricity production. And so there was this nexus in supplying water for cities and supplying electricity for cities. So using hydropower plants, using the water for production of electricity, which was going against the draw from water for water consumption. And so this, although we were not planning on motivating the paper through the production, it ended up as being really relevant, the nexus between water and energy production. So there's this nexus both in production and in consumption. The predictions for water and energy. So under a no policy scenario, the world in 2050 will consume 80% more energy than in 2010, and 55% more water than in 2010. So there is this increased consumption of both electricity and energy, and thus the scarcity is growing. So there is this water consumption for hydroelectric production is increasingly important, namely in the presence of droughts, which tend to be related to climate change, and this unpredictability of weather patterns it's becoming more serious, and thus this nexus is also more relevant. There is some strong evidence between the correlation of water and electricity consumption, as I said before. And there is mostly, there are obviously demand and supply policies to address water scarcity. In many instances, the emphasis is put on the supply of water, not so much on the demand of water. And we chose to look at demand side policies, one in particular. Basically, there are two types of demand side policies: price policies, so addressing the consumption through price, or addressing the demand through information and behavioral interventions. And there is some literature on this side as well. And that's where we are focusing a little bit our paper. So in terms of behavioral interventions, I'll give you some literature review on this. So strangers in 2011 published a paper examining the effectiveness of in-home displays of consumption of both electricity and water. And what he found is that there was a significant reduction in both water and energy consumption, but he raised one question, which was by focusing two things actually that he advised against. First is that by having a meter, people may get a perception of what is the normal consumption, and so don't adjust to different patterns of consumption, just to marginal adjustments to the normal. And the other thing is that after some time, people may lose interest in the use of this display mechanism. So decrease the number of times they go and check what the meter is saying. So some effectiveness, but some advices against, some cautionary advices against the use of these devices per se. Fielding in 2013 did a field experimental study on water consumption in Australia. He and his co-authors had 4 groups, experimental groups. So they have a control group, so with no treatment. They had a group with just some general information. They had another one with general information plus some behavioral advices. And then another one with end-use advices, so specific to users, having meters so they could advise on each item in terms of consumption. What they found is that all 3 treatments have an effect in reducing water consumption, but that the effect faded away after 1 year of the experiment. And so he advised against this cautionary advice of the long-term effect relative to the short-term effect of these campaigns, these behavioral interventions. In 2013, Willis did a study on the effect of sociodemographic variables on the adoption of consumption reduction mechanisms, like reducing tap use in the showers or in the toilets, or other machines that reduced consumption. They found, again, significant effects. So the probability of adopting the mechanisms were related to the sociodemographic characteristics. But one of the results is that the cost of the mechanism can be perceived as too high relative to the savings that those mechanisms ensure. And so some information should be also given together with these implementation mechanisms. Willis also did a different study on environmental and water conservation attitudes. So the idea was to relate behavioral and conservation attitudes towards the consumption and see whether people with more stringent environmental preferences also had more adopted more practices of reducing water consumption. And he found evidence of this effect. Organi and Tonin measured the effectiveness of meters. This is a real field, I would say, experiment, because it was policy, it was mandatory in the UK. So they distributed smart meters in households for water, and together with the meters, they also implemented a different tariff scheme. What they found is that people were, so water consumption was reduced by having the meters and the new tariff scheme, but the effect was most significant relative to the meters and less to the tariff schemes. So if the 2 instruments were matched together, the meter had a more powerful effect on reducing consumption than the new tariff scheme, which people seem not to understand totally the incentives within the tariffs. And then one last paper examined the spillover effects between water and energy. So they provided information on water consumption and measured that effect on energy savings. And they found significant effects. So giving information on how to save water had a positive effect on saving of electricity. So giving support for this choice of using electricity and water together to see whether the consumption decisions are related. So that's on behavioral side. On the price side, mostly the literature finds a very low price elasticity of demand for water. So people tend to have very low price elasticities for water, and that's basically across countries, across time. They find some differences between the type of price schemes, so whether it is a linear price or block prices, so by chunks of consumption. They seem to have a little bit higher elasticity on block prices than on linear prices, but there is basically the idea is that price elasticity of water is low. Tortajada did a paper for Spain analyzing the perspective of water utilities, and so what they interviewed managers of water utility companies in Spain. In several regions. All of them, they were interviewed after some drought experience. And what they found is that the policies, from the perspective of the water utility companies, policies directed to price were less effective than policies non-price based. So this on the perspective of the water company. So basically, in behavioral, we have mixed results. Some behavioral interventions seems to have some effects. Some behavioral interventions seem to have only short-term effects, but not long-term effects. With respect to price, basically, there is a very low price elasticity, and so we should not expect price as an effective deterrence of consumption, since people do not adjust consumption when price changes, or they adjust consumption very little. In terms of price, it depends on the type of price schedule, whether it is linear or block pricing. It depends on demand and also the literacy to understand the incentives within the price scheme, which is not always a very clear. It's not very clear. It's not easy to read the price scheme of some water bills. In Portugal, this was one question I got in Italy. So in Italy, many households do not pay water. Water is paid by the condominium. In Portugal, no. Every household has a water bill and an electricity bill. So it's the same decision maker that sees the bill and decides consumption. So that problem that I was not aware, it is not a problem in Portugal, but in Italy it is. I don't know whether in Spain that happens. I thought that everyone paid water, but in Portugal, yeah, in Italy apparently not always. Okay, and finally there is evidence between the link between water and electricity consumption, although there is no consensus on how this link might work. Okay, so our study, basically, how is the price of water and electricity perceived, being that we focus more on water and we added just electricity for control of this study. So we did a survey this January of 400 Portuguese adults, and the theory that we have to frame the survey is basically the theory of planned behavior and reasoned action, which basically allow us to know or to state that stated preferences are a good indication of behavior. And the cognitive dissonance theory, which argues that people try to be coherent in their decisions, and so we expect similar behavior between electricity and consumption between water and electricity consumption decisions, arguing that people tend to be consistent or want to be consistent in their decisions. So this is basically our theoretic framework. So we did this survey. It's a little, it's not too big, but it's a little. We did it with prolific database, so people were rewarded for fulfilling the survey, for completing the survey. And the survey has several items. So we have consumers' awareness of water and electricity bill. We also have their awareness of the water bill components. And in Portugal, the water bill, it varies from municipality to municipality, but basically you have water, quantity of water. So that's one part of the bill. You have wastewater. You pay for wastewater treatment. And that is related to how much water you consume. You have waste collection. It is also in the water bill. And then you have some taxes. You have what we call a hydrological tax. So for the preservation of water resources. And that's a percentage of the bill. And you have the VAT tax. And that's it. Okay, so you have water, quantity of water, wastewater, wastes, and then several taxes. Okay, that's everything in the same water bill.
Excuse me, do they inform you about the waste you produce?
No, the waste, how much you pay is, in most municipalities, is dependent on how much water you consume. Even waste, solid waste. Solid waste is a fraction of the water you consume.
So they measure separately?
No. So it depends on how much you consume of water, and from there they compute with some percentage how much you pay for waste. Okay, so it's not separate in most municipalities. So we have already some municipalities that have other systems like pay as you throw, and in those municipalities you do not pay for the collection of the waste as a whole. You pay dependent on how much you produce of waste. But that's a very few municipalities in Portugal still. So mostly it's how much you consume of water dictates how much you pay for waste, which is not, yeah, obviously. But we are not talking about waste today. Sorry? It is a proxy of how many people you have in the household, but not of what's your behavior regarding waste separation and minimizing waste and all those things that should be in your, if you're addressing the question of waste, so your effectiveness in the waste sector, then we should have a different way to pay for the waste you generate. It should be as a function of the waste and not as a function of the people, because then it varies a lot. Yeah. But that's another area which is interesting. Yeah. Yes, that's true.
You mentioned a hydrological tax as well?
Yeah, we pay it's a very small percentage, but it's a tax that municipalities receive and then deliver to the central authority of water, and the revenues of that tax should be used, in principle, in theory, should be used to the preservation of water resources. So rivers and sea and everything. It's a real tax. Yeah, it's not a service. It's a tax. There is some discussion on how the tax is actually used. So yeah. But again, our topic, the thing was, are people aware of? Not really how do they know exactly what they pay? So we have also this. We asked them how many times they saw the bills, both for water and electricity. If they had any reduction devices installed for water or energy, and we had several devices as an option. We also asked the perception of the efficacy of these measures to reduce water and consumption. So the first one, so the installed devices in their own households, and how they perceive this as general and for themselves as well. We asked also their perception of water and electricity saving potential by end use. So how do you, if you were to reduce the amount of water you consume, do you think you would reduce in the toilets, in the showers, tap, dishwasher? How, in which area do you believe you could reduce, or do you actually try to reduce the water consumption? And also, we did not elicit the price elasticity. We would not be able to do that. But we asked subjects how much they would accept as an increase in their water bill without adjusting the amount they consume. So we actually asked this. How much would you accept as a percentage of your water bill without adjusting how much you consume? Okay, without adjusting quantity. So this is not an elasticity, but is a measure of the interval in which people would accept as reasonable an increase in the amount they pay without adjusting how much they consume. Okay, so if you consume the same, how much would you be willing to accept as an increase in the water bill? Water and electricity, we did for both. So it's framed as a willingness to accept question, but in an odd way, it could be framed as a willingness to pay, which would be how much would you be willing to pay extra without adjusting your consumption. We thought that this was an odd way to frame it, so we framed it as a willingness to accept an increase in how much they pay. Okay, this is what I was explaining. So we expect that the higher this willingness to accept an increase in the bill is a measure of the price elasticity. So the higher, the lower would be the price elasticity, right? If they accept big amount without adjusting the quantity, then you'd have a smaller price elasticity. Okay, so our hypothesis. So consumers' consultation of water and electricity bills are similar, that's one. The second, consumers with stronger environmental beliefs would check the bill more often as a measure of trying to save more. And also consumer sensitiveness to price changes depends on sociographic characteristics, the saving habits, and the environmental preferences. Okay, so our sample of our 400 Portuguese adults, it's young relative to the population, and this has to do with the fact that we are using an online platform which gets younger people. So most average 35, the range is between 21 and 63. We have about 80% in this middle range, 25 to 39 years old. So young adults. 40% female, so it's okay. More educated than the average Portuguese. So undergraduate studies, 44% of them have an undergraduate studies, 32 have graduate degrees. So we have about 66% of the population has either an undergraduate or a graduate degree. So clearly we are above the educational level of the population. And we also asked the area of studies, and we have basically a little bit of everything. So natural and exact sciences, human social sciences, arts and humanities. We have a little bit of everything. So there's no dominance on one area relative to other. Most of them employed by a third party. We asked not income, but financial comfort on a scale from 1 to 5. The median was 3, so in the middle. We also asked risk preferences on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 being risk averse, 10 being risk loving. We asked from a 0 to 10 scale, how do you classify yourself when taking decisions? Totally risk averse, totally risk loving. The median is 6, so a little bit towards the risk loving, but basically on the neutral side. There is some literature saying that people have different, might behave differently with regarding to environmental issues depending on their political attitudes. So on a scale from 0 to 10, we asked how do they position themselves from left to right. Median was, the mode was 5, so basically in the center of the scale. Regarding geographical distribution, we have a good coverage of the continental Portugal, having a higher percentage in Lisbon and Porto, which are the biggest cities, so that's also okay. So regarding to geography, we are okay. We also asked the place they live, how they would characterize the place between rural and urban on a scale from 1 to 5. The idea being that in urban centers, maybe people have a different perception of the environmental state, so they would have different. We have no a priori sign for this variable, but it could be relevant. And mostly we have an urban urban sample, which is that is consistent with the distribution of the population in Portugal. Regarding environmental behavior, we have several questions on environmental behavior. So we asked whether they separate waste for recycling, never, occasional, if possible. So most of them, if possible, is the dominant category. Do they save electricity? If possible, 32, occasionally 31. Do they repair damaged goods, in an idea of introducing some circular economy indicators here? I don't think we can read very much from this thing. If they try to reduce waste, again, occasionally if possible. Do they save water? If you compare, so we have a different pattern of saving behavior between water and electricity. Regarding water, we have a higher percentage of people trying to save water if possible and occasionally. So do never save. We have much more in electricity. Never saves is 0.75, so very little. Save water, never, we have more. But then on the right side, we have more people trying to save, actively trying to save water than to save electricity. And this is something that will stay with us. We asked also regarding environmental problems, their perceptions. So we asked them to name the 3 most important environmental problems in Portugal from this list. So the most common first problem was forest fires, which is interesting in the sense that the last, from 2017, which was the terrible year in Portugal, we didn't have many significant fires. So the memory of 2017 is there. So the most significant environmental problem is forest fires, and this is memory, okay? It's 2017 still present. We were surprised that water shortage in certain regions was I believe, the 3rd most important, and surface water pollution was the 2nd most important. And so the water, we had no context in the survey, okay? So this is not driven by context. And it's interesting that we have this amount of people mentioning water shortage in certain regions. Again, this was before February, where all the news about the drought came out. So this was before that. And people were already aware of this possibility of having shortage of water and water pollution. So that saving behavior that we have before is consistent with this naming water shortage as the 2nd most important, the 3rd most important environmental problem in Portugal. So our most interesting questions: do you check your water bill or your electricity bill? So electricity bill, everyone checks the electricity bill. Okay, there's no one saying I don't. Everyone checks it, and on average they check it 11 times a year. So almost every month they check the electricity bill. regarding the water bill is significantly lower, the percentage of people that check the water bill, and they, on average, they check it also fewer times a year, 9 times per year. So already here we have our intuition confirmed. No, it's very different what they do regarding water and electricity.
Excuse me, can we ask a question? What is the average consumption of water, of the water bill? How much it will be for an average household of, let's say, 3 people or 4 people? What could be expected on average?
It varies significantly between regions, and but it is not. I think our central authority does this statistics. The water bill relative to the income of the family represents about 1 to 2%. I think, yeah, it's about that. So it's low.
And electricity, on the other hand?
It's much higher. So if a household pays like 20 euros in water, they would pay like 60, 70 euros in electricity very easily, depending obviously if you are in the winter or in the summer. But I would say that a household of 4 people in the winter, they can go up to 100 euros very easily, right? At least 100 for people in the household. And in the summer, it would be about 50, 60 euros per water bill. So an average household would be in that range. And regarding water, again, if you don't have a garden, if you don't wash your car, so in an apartment, you would pay 20, 30 euros per month for water bills. The same type of household, without gardens and that stuff. So just in household. Do you know how much you pay for? So we asked them to disaggregate the water bill. So first we asked, do you know how much is your water bill total? 82% said yes. Then just how much do you pay for water? Then we only have 52% saying, I know how much I pay for water. For wastewater, we only have 33%. So we have clearly a difference between what is the amount that I pay, what's the amount that I pay for the water. Total electricity bill, 85% say yes, they know how much they pay. So then we asked them, we tried to see whether the frequency with which they go and see how much they pay is related to their savings behavior. And so for water, so people who never save water check on average 5.3 times per year the water bill, occasionally and if possible different. And this is these are statistically different numbers. The same for electricity. We have statistically significance in this number. So do people, so our 2.1 hypothesis, the habits of checking the water bill are similar between those who save and do not save water. We can reject that hypothesis. And the same for electricity. So savings behavior is related to how many times they go and see the water bill. So it can be the water or electricity. So the bill can be a mechanism to inform savings behavior, okay? Particularly for those who want to save, okay, obviously. So we also measured peer effects and the price relevance and fairness. How does your consumption compares to others? So we asked that to consumers. Water, 11% believe they consume more than similar households. In electricity, we have 23%, so it's different, and this difference is statistically different, significant. How important is price to decide how much you consume? Very important in water, we have 22%. In electricity, the percentage is significantly higher. And again, this difference is statistically different. Do you consider that the price you pay is fair? More than half of the respondents think that the water price is fair. 45% think that it is high. with respect to electricity is different. So 23% consider it fair. So a lower percentage consider the price of electricity fair, and a significant percentage consider it the price to be high. And again, this is statistically significant, the difference. So they have different perception of the prices. They think, they believe, they find that the water price, less than half think that the water price is high. That is very different for electricity. How important is price in deciding how much to consume? Clearly, electricity, most people think it is an important driver of consumption, not for water. And their comparison to others is also different between electricity and water. You cannot see this as expected. Okay, we did then some regression analysis, trying to understand this sensitivity to price. So our dependent variable is the willingness to accept. How much do you accept as a percentage increase in your water or electricity bill without adjusting your consumption? And I'll try to read this for you. So we have, so one column for electricity, the other for water. So the left is water, the right is electricity. And so the first top row is, so whether the tariff in the water tariff is a linear or is a block, or they don't know. It's not statistically significant. I'll tell you the significant ones. So in the case of water, significant variables are, do you think that the price that you pay is equivalent, higher, or don't know relative to others? It is significant and it has a positive effect. So the omitted category is not lower than others. Then how important is the price in determining your consumption? It is significant both in the water and electricity case. However, the size of the coefficients are very different. So for water, the size of the coefficients in important, very important relative to not important is around -8, -12. And does this, yeah. So here, this is -8, -12. So if the price is an important determinant of your consumption, and for electricity, the size of the coefficient is significantly higher. So it's 10 and -14. So although price comes out as significant, determining how much you would accept as an increase in your bill without adjusting the quantity, it's significant in both, is negative as it should, but it is much higher, the size of the coefficient is much higher in the electricity case. So giving support to our hypothesis that price may not be an effective deterrence mechanism in the case of water, but in the case of electricity, it would be. Then saving behavior. In the case of water, it is significant, not in the case of electricity. So households that save relative to those that do not save have a lower willingness to accept price increases without adjusting their consumption, which is reasonable if you think that people who save are more actively looking for being more efficient. And so they would adjust less because probably they have already adjusted their behavior, okay? So if you actively saving, you believe your intuition might be that you don't have much room to adjust your consumption. And so it's reasonable to expect this negative effect. Then we have sociodemographic variables. In the case of electricity, they are not significant, any of them. In the case of water, risk aversion is significant and positive. And whether rural, urban scale is also significant, and that's it. And both regressions are obviously statistically significant. So what we have from here, so the size of the price effect is different between electricity and water. being more important in the case of electricity than water. The habit of saving water being relevant, but not the saving electricity, probably meaning that there are more households, as we know in the survey, there are more households actively looking for saving water than looking for saving electricity. And so the room for saving is different. And we have a partial support hypothesis that price is not that relevant in water, and household characteristics seems to be somewhat relevant for the case of water, but not for the case of electricity. So given these results, so going back, the driver for this project is, do people know how much they pay for water? And if so, can then price be an effective deterrence mechanism? And also, if under the hypothesis that maybe price might not be an effective deterrence mechanism, is behavioral interventions expected to be more effective? So in terms of behavioral insights from our survey, what we have is that peer comparisons might be relevant, as it shows up in our regression as relevant. So giving information on how you position yourself relative to a similar household, to your neighbor, to the average of your neighborhood, might be an important behavioral, an effective behavioral intervention. Let's see. We expect to be here next year with some results for this question. We asked, one of the devices that we asked was an app, like a smart meter, that would give information, instant information on consumption. It didn't appear in our sample as relevant. And this is even more important since we are using a sample that is younger than the population and more educated than the population. So if it does not show up here, hardly would show up in a representative sample of the population in Portugal. And also that consumers engage more frequently in saving electricity than water. And so this should be taken into account if we design some behavioral interventions. Regarding to price, on average, consumers would be willing to accept a 35% increase in their water bill without adjusting consumption. In the case of electricity, the percentage is significantly lower. This fairness, so half of them consider price fair for water, less than half consider it high, so this might be relevant. While for electricity, the percentage that considers the price high is significantly higher than for water. So our final conclusions. In a setting where we have increasing water demand, so the scenario is for a 45% increase in water demand by 2050. And we have climate change, and so the unpredictability of water supply, the reserves of water, understanding how to design effective policies to refrain consumption is obviously increasingly important. If on one side scarcity might mean higher prices, we should not forget that access to water is a human right. It is recognized as a human right. And so the legitimacy of using price as a mechanism for deterrent consumption in households is questionable if you have this human right of access to water. So the balance between how to incentivize an efficient use of consumption using price, maybe price goes against this access to water that we are entitled to. Then obviously we can go and argue what's the objective measure of access to water. Okay, you have access to water, to how much water should you have access to comply with the human right determination, and then after that, then you are above your right, and then maybe above that price is a legitimate way of refraining consumption. So this is also something that governments should be aware. Should price be used? Okay, would it be effective? What are the alternatives? Our results basically say that price may not be an effective deterrence mechanism for water consumption. Vastly, consumers are not aware of the price they pay. So we not only ask how much you pay, we also ask, do you know the price scheme? Do you know if you have a linear, a block price scheme? And we have a significant percentage of people that do not know what's the price scheme. So the price tariff is not there. And we have a significant willingness to accept increases in water bill without adjusting consumption. So if we go to behavioral interventions, peer comparison seems to be an avenue to go, since people know that. Saving practices also. Saving technologies might also be an interesting, so equipments, physical equipments to save, as the literature shows, and they may be more a fairer mechanism to refrain consumption. Then it's not only about the efficacy of the mechanism that we use to try to reduce consumption, but also how fair it is to use that type of mechanism, since we are dealing with a good that is a human right. So this should be contemplated. And so I think yeah.
Thank you very much, Lígia. Comments, questions, suggestions? I let the public. Preguntas? ¿Alguna pregunta, alguna duda? ¿O hay alguna cuestión por ahí sí que hay? I have a few while the public warms up. It's always like that. I'm sure they will come up with questions, but I wanted to ask you, I've been thinking about the evaluation scenario. Mm-hmm. So everyone, independently of whether it's a household, let's call it a conservative household in terms of consumption, or another household which is very exuberant in their consumption, mm-hmm. They get the same question on how much would you be willing to accept as an extra price to keep the consumption as you have it. No, I mean, mm-hmm. Not to mm-hmm. reduce quantity, how much you will be willing to pay extra. No, how much you will be willing to accept as an increase, price increase. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, why have you framed it in that way? I'm sure there are very good reasons, and it would be nice if you explain us this, because I would have framed it as probably a willing to pay question. If you don't want to make any quantity adjustment, you may have to pay higher prices in a context of scarcity. How much will you be willing to pay extra for keeping your actual quantity?
Okay,
I wonder.
Yeah.
For you?
I understand your question. We didn't want to give too much emphasis on a scenario for. So I understand what you're saying. So we could have framed, given that there is this water scarcity and there is this problem, how much would you be willing to contribute us? In our intuition, it didn't work well. So we didn't want to stress the water scarcity. It was intuition, I must say. We could have asked how much would you be willing to pay to preserve, to contribute without adjusting the consumption. I'm not sure we would have different results, but I don't have a theory guiding us in this choice. I don't know if you want to add some comments, but
we thought that in this context, a more traditional willingness to pay would feel weird for the families to respond. So these are not the traditional subjects of I don't know, a student sample or whatever. So I thought this would be more natural. So where would you go? Up to where would you go? Because I pay 50. Up to where would I go without telling my daughter to take shorter baths? I would go up to 60 perhaps, or 70. Then, okay, everyone has to start adjusting. So that was our intuition. Okay, I pay 50, so how would I adjust? And Yeah, so didn't want to go into the, but yeah, it was intuition. We cannot really say
Yeah,
that. It was, we talked, we tested between ourselves, our husbands, and yeah, and we thought this was. But you're right, of course, the more traditional willingness to pay would capture that. And we felt excited about a different format. I think as researchers, we are always excited to try different things. So I think
maybe also the one possible justification for us not being so reluctant to use the willingness to accept is that we have in our renewable energy project, we did field surveys with willingness to accept questions, and people, although there's a vast literature saying, okay, willingness to accept, we should not because people will overstate. What we found in our renewable energy project is not really. So in that project, we asked willingness to accept as a percentage of the electricity bill, since we were talking about renewables. And the percentage were reasonable, as they would expect for being indexed in your income or in your bill. The willingness to pay, which is usually the natural limit for willingness to pay. So we have not found any problems that the theory says that willingness to accept is overstated because people don't have a natural limit to how much they are willing to accept. But in this case, it's actually, I know that for people doing economic valuation, this should be framed as a willingness to pay, and it actually is interpreted as a willingness to pay. I'm willing to accept an increase in price, so I'm willing to pay the increase in price. But it was a little bit like, okay, how far would you go accepting an increase in the not in the price, but in the amount you pay?
No, it's just an interest.
Yeah.
And another quick question while my colleagues are getting ready to ask is, you ask consumption in terms of prices paid, or I mean the bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of water saving, I wonder if you could ask the number of liters that they use, and if they have a clue, because probably for behavioral interventions, the number of liters or the quantity used, I'm sure is much more shocking than the price you pay.
Sure.
And probably in that regard, you can do interventions, which is the feeling that I'm getting here, that we are preparing to set up interventions in the future.
Yeah.
Moving or making them aware of the number of liters and how you could save. Because my next question would be, because I've been thinking while you presented, it would be interesting to do a split sample maybe approach or something, in which you ask for increases in prices, but maybe you should ask also for reductions in quantity. In the sense that this is not sustainable anyway, our behavior is not sustainable, so how much they are willing to give up. I wonder. Just
No, that's very, very much true. In fact, some municipalities changed their water bills to report, usually they report cubic meters, and they changed the water bills to report liters, which is a measure that maybe people are more familiar with, I'm sure. Lay people are more familiar with liters. And you are right that people get shocked when they understand how many liters of water they spend in a shower. So we have not done it in a formal way. We have done it in student classes project. Last year projects in our economics degree. And so convenient samples, it's students and their families and parents and stuff. But, and it is true that people do not know how many liters they spend extra for having 1 minute extra in the shower. They have no idea. So the error is very high. So yeah, totally, yes. Quantity is something that should be used, as we see, and the literature shows that these devices, what they give you is information on the quantity, and they are effective. So, yeah.
With scarcity in water, for instance, as water, having water is a human right, then the question would be, well, how many liters per person a day.
Yeah, yeah.
1 liter for drinking in the house, and 1 liter for cooking, and another liter for cleaning.
Yeah, yeah. There is an
It's
estimate,
more
Paulo
scarcity.
would know the number.
Thinking how many liters per person a day? It would be very few comparison with
Yeah.
quantity of use every day.
It is, yeah. There is the basic point, obviously, when we start, and this, as I said, is the first leg of a project that we intend to develop further, is a little bit the assessment of the field, trying to understand a little bit more, to then do more advanced stuff. There is an amount, I don't know the number, of consumption of water per person, the minimum consumption of water per person. And then that amount could be, if we are able to design some behavioral interventions, that would be the amount that we assume as a human right that should have an accessible price. And then after that, you should scale up the price. If you're using price, you should scale up the price more heavily. But there is this, it is interesting that most people, significant percentage of people try to save water, because one of the things that I think we need to evaluate is how efficient are people already using water? Because since so many people reveal that water scarcity is a problem, is the third most important problem, given that a significant part of the population says they save water, what's the room for saving more water within the household? Is it a significant percentage? That's a question that I have. I'm not sure. Because one problem that we have in Portugal is the amount of water loss within the system. So between how much the system sets out and how much people receive in their households, on average, 30% is lost. So maybe if we want to address water scarcity, maybe it's not in the households with apps and smart meters and all that things. Maybe it's the network that needs to be improved. So I think this is one question that we need to evaluate. How efficient are households in using water? What's the room for more efficient? What's the cost of that possible increase in efficiency in equipment or whatever, compared to addressing the infrastructure that is losing 30% of the water that is treated. So it's human quality water that is being lost. It's not lost in the sense that it doesn't arrive to the final destination. So.
¿Alguna otra pregunta no chat ou abrides o micro, os presentes? Jorge, sí. Jorge, ten a pregunta. Adelante, Jorge, tú mismo, sí.
Gracias, María. I will ask Professor Pinto about his opinion about how far the difference observed in consumer behavior are shaped by the difference in the supply side. I mean, you said that the water bill is absolutely rigid, has no competitivity between suppliers, so the consumer has no option between different suppliers, and it really has no incentives of consuming in a different way. While in the electricity market, there is some competitivity, limited, but there is some flexibility or some competitivity between different suppliers and different types of billing the consumption. Changes in this supply side could enhance or could improve water savings. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in electricity, we have competition at the end supply. So we can choose the supplier of electricity. We cannot choose the supplier of water because it's not possible. It's not physically possible to have competition in the water sector. So households cannot save money by changing supplier of water, but that's not a possibility. Physically, it's not a possibility to have different suppliers of water. It's a natural monopoly. It's the case of a natural monopoly. So yeah, there is no, so the adjustment is not by changing supplier to save money, but also our focus is not so much on saving money, is saving quantity. So that's, but yes, you cannot go to other suppliers. Yeah.
Emma, go ahead. Thank you. Yeah, we have another question.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you well.
Okay. Did you know if in your sample you have people getting water bonus discounts? I mean, do you know if they are good, bad idea?
I didn't understand. Water discounts. We don't have water discounts. We have a social tariff for water. So people with income below a certain level can ask for a social tariff in water, help to pay the water bill. But okay, there are no water discounts for.
Okay, no. But and do you know if these people getting this they usually care more about the bills or less, or you have some different incentives?
Yeah, if they have different incentives, so if they care more about the bill that they are paying, even though they are going to be getting a rebate or.
Oh, no, but no, and we will not probably be. We can see whether the financial comfort relates to how much they consult the water bill. I think I tested that and there was no statistically significant difference, I believe. I would need to check again, but I don't think this is a very new project, but I'm almost sure I checked all the sociodemographic. In the regression, it doesn't come up as significant for the willingness to accept, and that I'm almost sure it's not significant for the saving behavior, but I would need to check it again. Yeah, but thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? ¿Alguien más? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? No, no hay. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias, Lígia. Thank you so much.